All right, let's get started. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We at Beeswax hope that you are all safe and healthy and doing and taking whatever necessary precautions you need to remain so. We are still hard at work, distributed all over the globe. So you may see us on some video conferences in some odd locations, but we still stand ready to assist in any manner you guys need. So I'm excited today to introduce you to our host who will be taking us through this webinar. His name is Shamim Samadi. He is our co-founder and chief product officer. So he built the thing and he'll be able to talk to you about strategies to optimize to your delivery goals. So just a couple housekeeping things. If you have questions, please do ask them in the Q&A tab that is at the bottom of your screen. You can just click on that, type in your questions, and at the end there'll be plenty of time for us to answer them. And there will be a recording of this webinar that will be made available for streaming within 24 hours of the completion of the webinar. And if you have any more questions after that, you want to get in touch with one of us at Beeswax, there'll be an email address at the end where you can contact Shamim directly with any follow-up that you might have. So without any further ado, I will turn this over to Shamim.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks everyone for joining. Just to echo Paul, really hope everyone's safe and staying healthy and sane. And you know, what a better way to spend your time than while we're all at home joining a webinar. So I appreciate you guys joining and making the time. I don't think we'll take the full hour. It'll probably be about 15 to 20 minutes of content, and then we can dive into your questions. So definitely do pose those questions as you have them as we go through this. So quick agenda. I'll sort of introduce the feature and talk about how it's different than typical optimization, which is typically done around price, and how it really enhances that. I'll go through some examples. We'll look under the hood a bit more about how we do it and how you can you know, be educated about how we do it so that you could potentially use the feature in the right ways. I will give a quick demo of how to use the product in the UI, and then we'll go through your questions at the end. So in terms of how sort of classic programmatic optimization works, most of it, we're all familiar with sort of bid optimization, which is around how to optimize your bid price depending on you know, the attributes of the inventory. So in this case, this typical bid optimization is bidding differently on site A, site B, and site C. And we at Beeswax, we've built a bunch of different optimization products around how to optimize price. So you guys are very familiar with it. We're very familiar with it as well. So that's the sort of typical way to think about optimization in terms of price. But there is a second half to the story, which is independent of price. It's how much budget do you want to spend on said inventory. So think about it in terms of how do I want to allocate my delivery of my budget to the different sources of inventory. So in this example, you know, you may want to spend as much of your budget on site A and as little as of your budget on site C. And so that again is independent from price. Think of it in terms of allocation. So this is, we're talking about, you know, in this webinar, we're talking about delivery, which is the right-hand side here, and how you can be smart about allocation. So when I say the term delivery and delivery goals, let me just list a few common ones. And as you know, I'd encourage you to think about some of the delivery goals that you have as a business and how they might be different. But the stuff we've heard over and over from our customers is something like, hey, I want to stop running so much of my budget on big, mediocre apps or sites. So they're high volume, but they're mediocre in terms of performance. And you know, at the end of the campaign, I look at my reports, and there's a lot of my spend are on those big, mediocre apps or sites. That's one sort of problem statement. Another one is, we've heard a lot, I may want to fulfill my deal IDs before buying open exchange inventory. So there's a notion of deal ID inventory being more premium, and therefore I want more of my budget to go there before I sort of buy on open exchange. Another one around that's more performance oriented is sort of the corollary to the first one, which is actually want to deliver more on the apps and sites that are performing best, but I don't want to do that manually because manual is an operational overhead and it's suboptimal. And we'll actually go into why we think it's suboptimal a bit later. So these are a couple of common delivery goals. I would encourage you to think about what your delivery goals are as a business. And before I go into it, I want to talk about sort of a philosophical approach and a product approach that we have towards delivery. So we believe delivery is a optimization problem. So to make that a bit more clear, you know, this notion of controlling delivery is not something that you know, we've invented. Other bidding platforms, it's quite common. We have many controls around delivery because it's a common optimization objective. But most other platforms handle it with some form of budget control. Even if they don't call it budget, they may call it splits, they may call it budget, they may call it something else. But they handle it in the form of budget. And when I say budget, I mean it is a something that you have to allocate manually and acts as a cap as well. So it is normally done through creating many line items or other objects, campaigns, or there could be other objects that are created. And then the sort of the trafficker or the trader allocating budget manually. And there's two problems with that. It's sort of manual and budget acts as a cap. And so, you know, we don't think manual budget allocation is the right way to solve this problem. We think of it as an optimization problem. So our approach is not asking our customers to set hard budget caps, but instead to set budget goals as weights. And we'll talk about that in more detail, but it's really a goal and it's expressed as a weight. And we want to avoid the human error with manual allocation of budget. So some very common things that can happen if you manually allocate, you can under allocate, and since budget acts as a cap, there could be more inventory available than you thought. And so you could misallocate and miss out on that opportunity, or you can over allocate. And what happens with over allocation, as folks know, is if you will then need to redistribute the budget you have allocated to objects like line items, which gets very tough to do if there are more than a couple line items. Like in a simple example, we have 5 line items and one of them have been over allocated. Redistributing that over allocated amount in the right way is prone to human error and will be suboptimal, and gets very hard if there's many line items. So in terms of an objective, delivery models will allow you to do 2 things: optimize the delivery to your delivery goals, and at the same time ensuring full campaign delivery. So it's doing those 2 things, and we think those 2 things are really important because they're common business objectives. You want to do both of these things for most of your campaigns. So let me go through a couple of use cases before we get into the sort of the details of how the feature works. So the first use case is around allocating the goals intelligently. So in a typical, this would be sort of what a typical approach could be in another system, and why it might be suboptimal. So in this case, I have a campaign, I want to spend $10,000, and let's say I've broken it out into multiple line items. So it's described here as 3 different line items, one for owned and operated, one for deals, and one for open exchange, each with their respective sort of budgets. So what can very likely happen in this scenario is the actual delivery of the overall campaign will not be met. So in this case, just as an illustration, we only spent $8,900, and that's because there was not enough deals inventory or owned and operated inventory to hit their respective budgets. And so, you weren't able to spend the entire $10,000. That's a very common sort of scenario, a very simple one, but very common. So our approach is different. So we say you create one line item, not multiple. And there's this new object called a delivery model, which describes how you want to weight the different segments of inventory. So in this case, I have 3 criteria as an illustration: owned and operated, deals, open exchange. I give them a weight of 541. And what our system does, it converts those weights into budget allocation. And it does 2 things. It will pace towards those delivery weights. So it will do its best to spend the $5,000 on owned and operated, et cetera. And it will do something else, which is if it cannot meet the budget of a specific row in this model, it will dynamically reallocate the budget to the other rows to ensure that there's full delivery. So in this case, the system learned there is not enough owned and operated in deals inventory. And so it over time redistributed that budget to the open exchange portion of the inventory. And it spent that extra $1,100 on open exchange and was able to fulfill the full $10,000 budget. So I will go a little bit deeper into how it works, but this is one common use case is around allocating delivery against more premium inventory. Another use case is more around driving better performance. So in this case, let me explain this graph, but this is a case where you are, let's say you're optimizing towards a viewable CPM, but you may have different business objectives. You may be optimizing towards a margin or a conversion rate or a video completion rate or whatever it is, whatever the KPI is that you are trying to achieve on behalf of your customers. You could replace this sort of slide with a different KPI. But in this case, just the way to read this slide is on the y-axis on the left, I have the impressions that I've delivered on my campaign. On my x-axis, I have the different sites. And on the y-axis on the right, I have the VCPM for those sites. And so you could see sort of on, let's just take an example. Sites K, L, and I, those sites, you're spending a lot of your budget, lots of impressions are going to those sites. They are below the $5 VCPM goal, but they are bringing down your overall average VCPM. Spending a lot on them, they're barely under the $5 CPM. Whereas you have some very high performing sites where you're spending little budget. So sites B, C, E, G, performing incredibly well, but not spending a ton. With a delivery model, you can shift the spend to the higher performing sites and thereby reduce your overall VCPM. So, that's more of a performance use case. And again, you could think about, I would encourage you to also think about what your performance goals and how this could apply for you specifically. So how we do it, I've already described some of this, but just going into a little bit more depth. The way the feature works is that as a customer, you can specify the the features, and you also can specify the weights. So, you know, there are more than 50 different features that you can choose from, and they're all documented. So if you go to our website, docs.beeswax.com, you could see the list of all the features. But in this case, it's a very simple example. The feature I've chosen is domain, but it very well could be app or operating system, or several, it could be combinations of multiple features. And I also give Beeswax a weight associated with that feature. And what we do is we normalize that weight and turn it into a target percentage. So normalization meaning, you know, we make sure everything adds up to 100%. So in this case, we interpret this as you want 50% of budget on New York Times, et cetera. And then what happens next is we pace towards each of those rows in your model. So we try to spend, you know, 50% of your budget on New York Times, et cetera. Again, if we are unable to achieve that target, we will dynamically reallocate that budget to the other rows to ensure that you fulfill your entire campaign budget. And it's worth noting that we have this notion of a special default weight that you can apply for any inventory that doesn't match the model. So, you know, in this case, you could say for any site that is not on these 3 sites, I want to apply a default weight, which you can do in the platform. So that's a little bit more about how it works. And it's worth noting, just coming back to the beginning, that we think of delivery as being independent from your bid price, and that you can use our bid model feature along with delivery models. And this is what our typical customers are doing. They have one model, which is specifying the bid price, and another model, which is specifying the delivery allocation. And together, you can hit your KPIs if you combine them in the right way. So with that, I will just give a very quick demo, and then we'll take your questions. So I am in the Beeswax UI, and you know, I'm in a campaign, and this campaign may have line items. But I'll just show you how to create this model. So in our UI, you create something called a modifier. We give it a name, and there's a couple of ways of doing it. You could do it in the UI, or you can upload a file to us. I'll show you the UI workflow. And so I'll give a default weight of 1, meaning if it doesn't match my the terms I set, it should default to 1. And just following that use case we had before, I may have 3 different domain lists, right? My high performing sites, medium, and low. And I may do something like this. I may say for my high performing sites, I want a weight of 10. For my medium, I want 5. And for my low, I want a delivery weight of 1. And so it's as simple as that. You set the weights in the UI. I'll show you one more cool feature that we have, which is we have this notion that with things like lists, where there are many items in this list, you can set it to dynamic, which means that you can, instead of using this this default weight here, you can do it on an actual list item. So let's look at it. So let's look at my low performing sites. I have a default weight of 1, and I'm going to make that that one dynamic. And what that'll do, it'll allow me to, let's say, for example, I change my mind mid-campaign, and one of the sites in my low performing, I actually want to shift more budget towards. So I can do that in the list itself. So I have a list of 3 sites, and I can go to a list item. Let's say site 3 is performing actually better. I'll put a weight of 5. And what that'll do is if you have a list item level value, that will override the default list that you've set. So we set 1 earlier, and this item, this site 3 has 5, so it'll use 5 instead of 1. So dynamic means like, hey, get my weight from the list item instead of at the entire list level. So that's a quick demo. You know, you could do it, of course, on any other of the features, whether it's operating system, zip code, etc. And you could also do it on a combination of those features as well. And so with that, that is really the content, and would be happy to take some questions and go deeper on any topics that folks would like.
All right, thank you, Shamim. So we have a couple questions that have come in. First is, what is the cost for this feature?
So there is no cost. This is a feature just like our bid model features and any of our optimization features, even though you know, there can be a lot of compute and a lot of data that we host on your behalf. There's no additional cost associated with the feature, and yeah, it's free.
Okay, all right, and here's another question. When you have different modifiers set for, say, site lists or OS or geo, what gets prioritized with many modifiers?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. So the way that the system works is if you specify these in the UI, we ask you to use, and the UI validates that you use only one feature. If you want to combine features, then you upload those through a separate file, which we call a delivery model. And the way that works, it's think of it as the combination. Each row in the model should be a unique combination. So in the example of, let's just say it's OS and site, you know, every row in the file that you upload for OS and site should be a unique combination, so that there is only one hit in the model and there's no ambiguity in terms of which row will be used as the delivery goal.
Okay, we have another question. What advice do you have on using bid models and delivery models together?
So I think the advice is, so typically what folks have done before delivery models is the way they have tried to win more impressions is by bidding more. And we think that that's not always the best strategy. We think that the bid model should articulate the bid price that you should pay in order to you know, hit your sort of KPI. But artificially bidding more just to win more, we think is incorrect. So we think you should, bid model should articulate price, and delivery model should articulate your allocation independent of price, so that you can get the best outcome. Like just a simple example would be, instead of bidding more, which will result in a higher clearing price in the first price auction, don't do that, but instead bid the correct amount and control it through delivery instead.
Okay, and we have one last question we'll take. Actually, two more questions. First, can you use this feature to remove PMPs and meet any upfront budget goal while also controlling inventory selection in the process?
So can you repeat that? Can we remove? Yeah.
Can you use this feature to remove PMPs and meet any upfront budget goal while also controlling inventory selection in the process?
So you can, I think the question is, can you remove? Yes, I mean, the way to think about it is, there's another, I think the question is sort of a corollary, which is, can I use this to also exclude things? If that is the question, the answer is yes. Like typically that's done through targeting. We would recommend customers exclude stuff through targeting. but you can also do it through a delivery model by putting a weight of 0. If I did not answer the question, feel free to sort of re-ask it, and I'll do my best to answer it. But
yeah, and we will make your email available on the next slide for your further follow-up. Another question: if target A cannot be met on day N, and 30% are reallocated to another target, but on day N+1 there's plenty of inventory to reach target A, will the budget be over-delivered on day +1 to hit the target on average?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in this, so let me answer that, and let me also step back and explain how the dynamic reallocation works. So the way that it works is every depending on the budget type, if it's set to pacing towards a daily budget or a lifetime budget, we will every hour or few hours we will assess whether we're on target or not. And if we are not on target and are unable, we're behind rather, we will reallocate budget to the other rows. So that's how it will continuously do that over time, right? So every few hours we will reassess and redistribute budget. The question is around, let's say I think you've dynamically reallocated budget out of one row, but then you learn in the future that there's actually more available inventory now. Will the budget get redistributed back? The answer to that is currently no. That's an enhancement that we're working on. Currently, once budget gets reallocated out, we don't currently bring it back, but that's an optimization actually we're working on as part of a version 2, which is budget being able to move out and back between the rows.
All right, so I hope that answered the questions. If you could advance the slide, I do want to let you guys know that you can feel free to email Shamim and inundate him with awesome technical questions, or just if you'd like to learn more about Beeswax or any of the topics that he discussed in this webinar, you can feel free to reach out. And with that, I want to thank Shamim. I want to thank everyone who tuned in today, and again echo that I hope we're all staying safe, and this is a great way to take advantage of the fact that we're all sitting in front of screens, is to learn something new virtually. So thank you guys very, very much, and we'll be doing more of these in the future.
Thanks, everyone.